Today, I'm walking you through my complete MPC-to-DAW workflow. I'll show you how I take a finished beat on my MPC and get it sounding polished and ready to share. I just want to start off by saying that you can definitely mix in your MPC. I personally just choose not to. And what I'm showing you is just faster and more practical for me to do with the setup that I have. I choose to mix my MPC beats in Logic because I've been using Logic for quite some time. I know what plugins I have available, and I know that my session in Logic is going to be able to withstand the amount of plugins and effects I want to use without the system crashing out. I have an MPC Live. I don't know if this is for every MPC Live, but for me, when I start putting EQs and compressors and go too crazy with plugins, the whole thing just like shits the bed and doesn't work for me, and then I have to start over. I've kind of gone through a trial and error of figuring out what works for me, and what I'm showing you is just something that's working for me right now. If through this process you have other methods that you like to use, feel free to share them with me, because I'm always willing to learn more and make my process more efficient. So I would really appreciate feedback as well. If you're saying, hey, Matt, maybe you could do this or do that, and this will work better for you. So yeah, just let me know. This is kind of just how I do it. Let's get into it. The first thing that I'm doing is exporting all of my sequences into one sequence so I have the full arrangement. For example, I would have my intro, my chorus, my verse, or however my beat was structured, I would have that all in one sequence. If you perform your beat live and you want to take those stems and mix them in a DAW, you can already skip this step because your arrangement will already be recorded into one sequence. As you can see in my MPC, I performed this specific beat live. Therefore, I'm ready to go and everything is in one sequence. So if I had multiple sequences that were different parts of my beat, I would need to organize that in the song icon right here. So I would click song, then you would insert your sequences based on the structure of your beat. So insert, 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 insert. Now, if sequence 1 is your intro, you put sequence 1. If sequence 2 is your verse, you put sequence 2, and so on and so forth until you have your finished beat. Once you have that, you can convert sequence and just put it to whatever unused sequence you have next, and then that's going to essentially bring your full song all organized into one sequence, ready to bounce. The next thing that I'll do is some light volume balancing in my MPC with the faders. So the goal here is just to make sure that when my song plays, that I have no clipping in my output meter. The name of the game isn't necessarily having a perfect mix here. It's just having a rough mix and making sure that when you do transfer these files to your DAW, you're not going to have any unwanted digital clipping or digital distortion. So yeah, just taking a quick look at what I have here. And obviously you're going to want to listen to your whole song to make sure that you don't have any clipping in certain areas, but everything looks good in my song. So let's move on to the next step. The next thing that I do is separate each track individually. In this case, all of my sounds are on one drum track. So what I need to do is explode the track. So when I bring those stems into my DAW, I will be able to edit each of those sounds separately. So I'll show you real quickly how you would explode your track. You want to go to your track. You want to hit this little edit icon, and then you want to just hit explode track. And what that's going to do is it's going to put each of your sounds on a separate track. Pretty self-explanatory. After you explode your track and you listen to it, you might hear some issues where the tails of your audio are potentially bleeding into one another. For me, I like to fix those issues in the DAW because I think it's just faster and easier. So let's get these stems into the DAW and I'll show you how I fix that issue. First off, to get your stems ready to go, you're going to go to save. You're going to go to audio mixdown. Make sure you have separate tracks checked off. And if you have any submixes or returns that you want to send as well, make sure you have that checked off. And then you're going to go export and just choose your location, click save, and you're good to go. So here are my exported stems, but you're going to hear that I'm having some issues with the audio tails bleeding into one another. So right off the get, that's not sounding like how I created it in my MPC. I personally just manually go through it because I can kind of work on my cuts and fades pretty quick. It's really just me manually going through and cutting the tails of certain audio, so I'm not getting that bleed anymore, and just listening to my MPC mix and just making it sound exactly like how it sounds on the MPC. Just to show you an example of exactly how I might make those cuts and fades. For example, you can see that this piano is clearly bleeding into this piano, and also vice versa. This piano is bleeding into that piano. So it's very simple. I'll just kind of listen and even look and analyze. Okay, well, in my original mix, it looks like that sound is stopping when that's being triggered. So as you can see, there it is. I made a cut there. So when that comes in, you're not hearing that, and vice versa. When this fades back out, that's coming back in, so you don't hear any bleed. Pretty simple. Can be tedious if you have a lot of tracks going on, but that's just kind of how I do it. So here is the edited version. Now that I have all of my stems in my DAW, which is Logic for me, I'll do another rough mix and just make sure, again, I'm not getting any of that clipping, and maybe I have a little bit of headroom, 3 to 6 decibels of headroom on the main output. And then once I kind of have that, I will group together various separate tracks to create, for example, my drum kit. Grouping your tracks isn't necessary, but I like to do it with certain instruments because it makes it easier for me to give my end result more of a cohesive, glued feel. So if I have my drum kit, I can then do compression just on the whole drum kit, and it kind of gives it a fuller feel, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of why I start grouping together my tracks. Once my beat is sounding leveled and organized and somewhat mixed, this is when I can start adding various plugins, compression, saturation, delay, distortion, and really adding in effects that I feel like are going to give my mix the character that I want it to have. I'm just going to give you a few examples of some techniques that work for me to get my beat and my mix of my beat sounding ready to share. I'm going to be going through these techniques fairly quickly and not really peeling back the layers on them. If you did want me to make a video about any of these techniques, feel free to leave a comment below, and maybe I can explore that in a future video. A few things I like to do with my drum set once grouped is distort, saturate, and compress. I'll do like a heavy drum smash compression and kind of bleed that into my drum set. I'll do a little bit of distortion that emulates maybe like a MPC 3000, and then I'll do a little bit of saturation with Saturn to give it a little bit kind of more drive. I'll show you like the before and after of what these effects sound like. So this is before those effects. And now this is with the effects on. Yeah, and in this case, it's really subtle, but it just gives it more drive, more grit, more feel. I don't know, for me it does it, and that's why I add these types of plugins onto my drum track. To expand a little bit on character, saturation, and distortion, the MPC Live that I have has some really cool options to give it, say, an MPC 3000 character with some saturation or an SP 1200 saturation. What sometimes I'll do is I will send maybe my drum track through a saturation on my MPC, and then once I bounce out those stems into Logic or whatever DAW you have, I'll have that basically saturated and distorted track with the, say, MPC 3000 emulation, and then I'll have that in my mix here to start bleeding in to the mix that I have in my DAW. I love the effects in the MPC. Anytime I have a chance to use those effects, I will definitely use them, print them out, and then make sure I have those in my mix in my DAW. When I do get to the mixing stage of having my groups, my drum kit, my keys, my bass, and my effects in this example, I'll start to listen and ask myself what frequencies in this group needs to be enhanced or what maybe needs to be brought out a little bit more. So for example, in my drum kit, my kick drum is a really prominent low-end frequency that I want to make sure is punching through. So I will kind of analyze other groups and other tracks and say, well, is the 60 hertz that is very prominent in my kit, is that potentially getting masked by any other frequencies in my groups? And if that's the case, I'll use EQ to carve out frequencies. So say my kick at 60 hertz can really live in that space and sound really prominent. When it comes to EQ, it's really just listening and deciding whether or not you want certain sounds to take up certain space in the frequency range so it can sound the best that it can sound. Of course, the last steps would be adding a little bit of EQ, compression, and limiting to the mix bus to make it sound nice and loud, so when you share it with people, it's not going to sound quiet compared to other beats and instrumentals that they hear. Let's take a listen to the beat before I exported it to Logic, and we'll take a listen to the beat after with all of the mixing and work that I did on it in Logic. And you can decide which one you like better, I guess. And that is essentially my workflow. It may not be perfect, but it helps me get beats from my MPC onto my DAW and make them ready to share with friends, artists, and the world. If you have any techniques that you use to get your beats sounding really nice and ready to share, feel free to share down below in the comments. I'd love to hear what everyone else is doing. I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.